It was 8 years ago, but it still feels like yesterday. Back then, I was 19, full of reckless energy and living in a small town in New Jersey. Things were quiet, and we didn't have much to do except stir up trouble. Me, Sean, and James, three troublemaking friends always looking for the next thrill. I'm not close with James anymore, but Sean and I still talk about that night often. We never quite figured out what happened, but neither of us can forget it. It was October. Halloween was around the corner, the perfect time for a little adventure or a lot of trouble. We decided to bring a Ouija board to a place we all knew was rumored to be haunted. An old abandoned church on top of a hill. The place had been empty for as long as we could remember. It wasn't even on a regular road. The path leading up to it was blocked off. Most locals avoided it, but not us. Sean had the Ouija board tucked away in his closet. When he pulled it out, we all knew we were doing something stupid. But that's what we did back then, right? I drove us there. I picked up James first, then Sean, and we headed toward the church in the dead of night. The road was barely visible in the headlights, surrounded by thick trees, and the only sounds were the crunching of gravel beneath my tires. As we got closer to the church, the sense of isolation became more pronounced. There were no other houses nearby, no lights in sight, just darkness. The road up the hill was blocked, so I parked the car on the side and we started walking. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying wood. We only had one flashlight, so we kept it low, not wanting to draw attention. When we finally reached the church, we all stood there for a second, staring at the dilapidated building. It looked like it was straight out of a horror movie. Creaking wood-cracked stained glass windows and overgrown vines creeping up the sides. The door was ajar, its rusted hinges creaking with every gust of wind. Sean pushed it open and we stepped inside. The air was thick with mildew, the floor creaking beneath our feet. Graffiti covered the walls, remnants of other people who'd trespassed long before us. But this felt different. It wasn't just an abandoned building, it felt alive in a way that unsettled me. Sean was the first to pull out the Ouija board, setting it up on the floor with 3 candles arranged in a triangle. It seemed like a good idea at the time. In the dim candlelight, everything felt more intense, the shadows flickering across the walls like they were moving on their own. We turned off our flashlights, leaving only the flickering candlelight. The whole place felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in on us. We began playing with the Ouija board, joking, at first asking the usual stupid questions. I thought it was all a joke. But then the planchette moved. At first it was slow, deliberate. I thought one of them was messing with me, but it felt too real. I wasn't sure what to believe. The movement of the planchette was subtle at first, just enough to make me feel uneasy. Then a loud crack echoed from the altar area. It was so loud it sounded like a large piece of wood splintering. We all jumped our heads, snapping toward the noise. I immediately thought someone else had to be in the church with us, someone who might have been hiding. But when we shined our flashlights in the direction of the altar, there was no one there. I tried to brush it off. Old buildings creak. It could have been the wind, but we all knew deep down something was wrong. Still, we kept going. We asked more questions, but the planchette stopped moving. The air was thick, oppressive. We took turns asking the board questions, but nothing came back. The tension in the room grew as the minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Then, out of nowhere, there was another noise, this time closer to us. Before we could react, something hit the Ouija board. It was a rock about the size of a golf ball. It landed squarely in the middle of the board, causing all of us to jump back, startled and screaming in terror. We had all been holding the planchette just moments before. None of us could have thrown it. It felt like the universe had just bent time and space to throw that rock. My heart hammered in my chest, and before I could think, we all bolted out of the church, leaving the Ouija board and the candles behind. We ran down the hill, adrenaline coursing through our veins. The darkness seemed to stretch out behind us, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following. By the time we got back to the car, we were all out of breath, our faces pale with fear. We sat in the car for what felt like an eternity, not speaking, just staring ahead. Finally, Sean spoke up, his voice shaky. That wasn't just a prank. That was real. Sean, as you can imagine, was the most superstitious of the 3 of us. He was deeply religious and believed in spirits and ghosts. He was convinced we had contacted something. I didn't know what to think. I didn't believe in any of that stuff, but I couldn't ignore what happened. We didn't make that rock move. And the noises we heard, there was something else there with us. The next day, Sean and James went back to the church to retrieve the Ouija board. They called me afterward. The board was gone, completely missing. But the candles? They were still there right where we left them. No sign of anyone else. No signs of anything unusual except the board was gone. That was the last time I set foot in that church. It remains the scariest experience of my life. I don't know what happened that night, and part of me doesn't want to know. But I'll never forget the feeling of something watching us. Something that didn't want to be disturbed. Maybe it was a prank, or maybe it was something else entirely. Either way, it was a lesson learned. Some places are better left undisturbed. Some things aren't meant to be played with. I used to work as a night restock worker at Great America, a supermarket in a small rural town. It was the largest store in the area, and because of that, we often got shipments late at night to restock the shelves before the morning rush. My shift would start at 10 p.m. when the store closed and end around 3 a.m. It was a quiet job, just me and one other person, either Terry Carter or Alfonso. On this particular night, it was supposed to be Terry and me. I arrived at the store just before 10 p.m., slipping in through the back entrance with my keys. The night air was chilly and I was feeling a little groggy from lack of sleep. The building was still. The store's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I walked past the empty aisles heading toward the stockroom in the back. I pulled out the pallet jack and started unloading boxes, preparing to restock the shelves, starting with bread and nuts. After about half an hour, I realized I hadn't seen Terry yet. This wasn't like him. We usually greeted each other as soon as one of us got in. I decided to check the back room where we usually left our things. His coat, his bag. But when I looked around, nothing was there. Odd. I left the back door cracked open, just a tiny sliver using the door stopper to keep it in place. It was a signal for Terry to come in when he arrived. I went back to work, but as I kept restocking the bread aisle, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Another 20 minutes passed and still no Terry. I headed back to the storage area again to see if maybe he was hiding in the back office. But this time when I got to the back, the door was completely shut. I thought that was strange. Terry wasn't in the back. I reached down to move the door stopper, but then I noticed something unsettling. It was on the ground outside, not inside where I had left it. My heart skipped. Something didn't feel right. I called Terry's phone, feeling the first sting of unease crawl up my spine. "Hey man, where are you? You're not here yet?" He picked up almost immediately, his voice groggy like he had just woken up. "I'm not coming in tonight," he said, sounding like he was in bed. I froze. I told him about the door stopper being kicked out. He brushed it off, saying it could have come undone by itself. But something about that didn't sit well with me. Terry had been the one who closed it tightly before. I wasn't convinced. Still, I tried to shake it off and went back to restocking the bread. But then I heard it. A loud crash echoed through the store like something or someone had knocked something over. My heart pounded. I glanced down the aisle. I was in my senses, on high alert. I quickly stood up, looking around the store. I saw him. A man dressed entirely in black walking through the dairy aisle across the store. He walked slowly, methodically, but what struck me was how he looked down at me as he passed the intersection of aisles. It was like he knew I was there. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I froze for a moment, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was just someone from another shift filling in for Terry. But deep down, I knew it wasn't right. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. "Excuse me!" I shouted across the store, my voice sounding more like a shout than I had intended. I wanted him to turn around, explain himself, anything, but instead he just kept walking. I ran toward the front of the store, the fluorescent lights flickering above me. My footsteps echoed through the aisles. When I got to the front, I saw him again standing at the end of the bread aisle, his half-hidden face peeking from behind the shelf. His mouth hung open like he was breathing too hard. Then he waved at me, but he didn't speak. My gut twisted. "What the hell?" I muttered to myself, my heart pounding in my chest. I asked him once again, "Who are you?" Without warning, he disappeared behind the shelf as if he'd never been there at all. I didn't want to stick around. My mind was racing as I stepped out of the store. I rushed to my car, locking the doors behind me. I called my boss, my hands shaking. "There's a guy in the store," I told him. "He's acting weird. I need you to come down here." I wasn't going to risk confronting him alone. The store was empty, and it felt like I was the only one there. "He could have been dangerous, who knows? Get him out of there if you can," my boss replied, "or call the police." I didn't hesitate. I called 911, giving them the details. I waited in my car, the engine running to keep me warm, watching the door. My palms were sweating. I had no idea what to expect. Minutes later, a police car pulled up. I greeted Officer Mitchell outside and led him into the store. We walked around, our footsteps muffled by the quiet of the aisles, calling out for the man. And then we saw him. He was standing in the frozen food section watching us. just standing there completely still. I'm not sure what was more disturbing, the fact that he was there or the way he looked at me. His eyes never left me. He smiled this strange, wide smile and his tongue flicked across his lips. His face was gaunt with heavy bags under his eyes. I could hear him whispering to himself, but I couldn't make out the words. "Hey," Officer Mitchell barked. "Come here." The man didn't resist. He walked toward us, his steps slow like he was enjoying some sick game. The officer took out his handcuffs, putting them on him with surprising ease. I couldn't look away from the man. His smile never faltered as they dragged him out of the store. "I was just looking for a snack," he said, almost playfully, his eyes still fixed on me. I could feel the cold shiver running down my spine. I didn't want to know what he meant by that. As the officer walked him out of the store, I watched the man's smile stretch even wider, more menacing. It was something I'll never forget. After the police left, I had to finish my shift, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching me. It was like his presence lingered in the store even though he was gone. Needless to say, I never left any doors cracked open again, not even a tiny sliver. I'm Luke, 25 years old, and I live on my family's farm in the middle of Arkansas. It's a small, secluded place, nothing like those big commercial farms you hear about. My parents have always talked about passing it down to me when they're too old to manage it anymore. I'm the oldest of three, and as the only son, it's supposed to be my responsibility. But honestly, I don't see myself staying here my whole life. The thought of this farm being my future stuck in the middle of nowhere, especially after what happened last July, makes me want to leave even more. It started innocently enough. My parents were on a romantic getaway for the week, and it was up to me and my two sisters, Sarah and Ellie, to take care of the property. There's not much around here, lots of trees, a few fields, and that's about it. A lot of privacy, which can get a little too quiet even for me. On that particular night, it was just us hanging out at the house. Sarah was in her room doing her usual online college work. Ellie and I were on the couch killing time watching some dumb show. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. We all shared the same feelings of wanting to get out of this life. But being stuck in the middle of nowhere on a farm wasn't an easy thing to change. We'd gotten used to the sound of the dogs barking out back at night, especially when something would spook them in the woods. It was just part of farm life, keeping an eye out for predators, but this night, the barking felt different, more frantic, more aggressive. I stepped outside into the chill of the night. It was too quiet in the air except for the dogs going nuts in the backyard. I figured it was just some raccoons or something, but when I looked toward the edge of the field, I saw them. The dogs were staring at the cornfield, ears pinned back, teeth bared. Something wasn't right. I yelled for them to shut up, but they wouldn't. So I stepped further out in front of the cornfield to get a better look. That's when I heard it, a whistling. Soft at first, then louder, unmistakably human. I froze. I'd heard about trespassers before, but I never thought it would happen to us. I ran back inside and grabbed one of the guns we kept in the house for situations like this. "Someone's out there," I said, grabbing my sisters. "I'm going to chase them off." Both Sarah and Ellie looked at me wide-eyed, immediately shaking their heads. "That's a terrible idea," Ellie said, her voice shaky. "It's pitch dark out there." I realized she was right. What the hell was I thinking? I was about to head into a cornfield in the dead of night with no clue who or what was out there. Instead, I went back to the dogs who were still barking like crazy. I fired a shot into the air, the blast echoing through the night, hoping that would do the trick. The dogs fell silent, and I felt a weird rush of power. "Get off our land!" I shouted into the night just to assert myself. I was still riding that adrenaline when I went back inside. My sisters were laughing, trying to lighten the mood. But before we could settle down, the dog started barking again. Even louder this time. My heart dropped. I grabbed the gun and ran back outside. That's when I saw him. A man standing about 20 feet from the dogs, right in front of the cornfield. His eyes met mine, and for a split second, I was frozen. I screamed at him, but before I could do anything else, he bolted into the cornfield, disappearing into the dark. I wasn't about to chase him, not into that field. Instead, I grabbed the dogs, unclamped their chains, and brought them inside. The last thing I wanted was for them to be out there with whoever was lurking in the dark. I rushed back in the house, my hands shaking as I told Sarah and Ellie what happened. We immediately called Dad, and he told me exactly what I needed to hear. "You're the man of the house now, Luke," he said, calm but firm. "You need to protect your sisters. Fire another shot if he comes back." We hung up, and I could tell the tension had reached a breaking point. Everyone was uneasy. Sarah and Ellie brought the dogs into their rooms, and I went to my own room with the gun, keeping it close. I tried to calm myself down, but I knew we weren't done with this yet. I lay in bed watching a movie on my laptop, trying to distract myself. The wind howled outside, but it wasn't until I heard the whistling again that I felt that cold stab of fear. I rushed to the window and looked out. There, just past the glow of the porch light, was the same figure, walking in the grass, slowly, purposefully. He was whistling like he knew I was watching. I grabbed the gun off the bed and aimed it out the window, pointing it at the ground a few feet away from him. I pulled the trigger, making sure I missed on purpose. The sound of the shot rang out, and just like that, the man stopped. His whistling cut off abruptly, and he turned. I didn't wait. I ran downstairs, heart pounding, and opened the front door. The man had already run off, away from the light. He didn't come back that night. I told my sisters what happened, but by then we were all too spooked to feel safe. The next morning, we didn't find any evidence of who the man was or why he was out there. It could have been a group of kids playing pranks on us, or it could have been someone far more dangerous. We'll never know. I don't know what made me feel more unnerved. The fact that he was so bold, or the fact that we had no idea who he was. One thing's for sure, though, I'll never look at the quiet night air around the farm the same way again. It was early winter, and I had just gotten off work around midnight. My girlfriend Emily and I had been hanging out for a few weeks, but this was the first time we'd gone on a real trip together. Emily's family owned a small cabin in Vermont, not far from Stowe Mountain Resort. She invited me to spend the weekend snowboarding there with her. It was about a 5-hour drive, but we were both excited for the adventure. As we neared the cabin, we turned off the main highway and began our journey down a narrow, isolated road. We had been driving for a while. Emily pointed out the windows, explaining how most of the houses here were either vacant or only occupied by people from out of state. It was dead quiet, just us, the snow, and the occasional driveway blocked off by dense walls of trees. We were deep in the mountains now. The car tires barely made any noise on the snowy road, and the only thing we could see were the dim lights of our headlights, cutting through the darkness. The only sign of life were the few houses that barely looked lived in. I could feel the isolation pressing in around us, but I didn't mind. It was peaceful in its own strange way. As we drove on, Emily suddenly yelled, "Slow down, it's coming up!" I slammed on the brakes. Up ahead, just barely visible in the dark, was a small opening in the trees. We turned down a narrow trail, our four-wheel drive kicking up snow as we crept closer to the cabin. It was small, covered in a thick blanket of snow, but it looked incredibly cozy. I could almost smell the warmth from the fireplace. We unloaded our things, turned on the heat, and made ourselves comfortable. It was already getting dark, and since we'd been traveling for hours, we just cooked up some of the food we brought and settled in to watch a movie. The Pursuit of Happiness. A strange choice for a snowy Vermont night, but it worked. The cabin was rustic, but had everything we needed. Heat, electricity, but no running water. Emily told me they used large jugs of water for things like washing dishes and hands. But the toilet situation wasn't as glamorous. We had to use the outhouse out back. I didn't mind it too much. I only had to pee that night, so I ventured out into the snow, careful not to get my feet too wet. The crisp air bit at my skin as I relieved myself in the freezing cold. It felt oddly peaceful, but as I turned to go back inside, I noticed something strange. Footprints. I followed them a few steps, squinting in the dim light. The tracks were odd, too large to be Emily's boots, and they didn't quite look like animal prints either. The trail wrapped around the house and then led off into the dark woods. "Emily!" I called. I motioned her over. She stepped outside and looked at the prints. "Probably just a bear," she said, shrugging. "They're all over the place around here." I wasn't so sure, but I didn't press it. I went back to the house and we went to bed soon after, eager to wake up early for the mountain, but even as I closed my eyes, I couldn't shake the odd feeling from the footprints. The next morning after breakfast, I went out to the outhouse again. This time, I noticed the prints had become clearer. They were definitely not animal tracks. I followed the trail a little further, but Emily called me back before I could go too deep into the woods. "Don't go too far," she warned. "We've got a full day of snowboarding ahead." We spent the day on the mountain. The snow was perfect, the runs were empty, and it felt like we had the whole place to ourselves. After an exhausting but exhilarating 8-hour run, we stopped at a diner for dinner and made our way back to the cabin. By the time we got back, the snow had picked up again. It was pitch black outside and the wind was starting to howl. We set up a fire, cranked the heat, and started playing some music, trying to unwind after a long day. I was sipping on a beer when nature called again. "I'll be right back," I said. I grabbed my boots and headed for the outhouse. The snowstorm was even worse than before. The winds were biting and the snowflakes were swirling so fast I could barely see. I closed the door of the outhouse tightly behind me to block the cold and heard the music from the cabin still blasting in the distance. But then just above the music I heard something else. Footsteps, crunching through the snow. Someone was out there. I froze. "Emily?" I yelled out into the storm. No answer. The footsteps continued circling around the outhouse, getting closer. I grabbed my phone from my pocket and tried to text her. The message wouldn't send. It was a dead zone out here. The footsteps stopped just outside the outhouse door. I tried to shake it off, but the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. I was just about to finish when the music from the cabin suddenly stopped. Complete silence. Panic hit me in waves as I stepped outside. I was standing in a void of blackness. The lights from the cabin no longer on. Had the power gone out? I turned on my phone's flashlight and noticed fresh footprints leading toward the cabin. They were large, deliberate. Someone had been out there, someone who wasn't supposed to be. I followed the trail toward the front door, my breath catching in my throat. I banged on the door, shouting Emily's name. The door opened abruptly and I was yanked inside. It was Emily. She slammed the door shut and locked it, her face pale. "There's someone out there," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I saw him. He tried to open the door when you went to the outhouse. I locked it just in time." She quickly told me that after locking the door, she'd cut the power to the cabin and hidden in the corner of the living room, watching through the window as a man walked slowly past, peering inside his face, blank and emotionless. I felt my stomach drop. Emily's father, Greg, had always been a little paranoid about safety, but now I understood why. She led me to a hidden trapdoor in the floor where Greg kept a few rifles and a shotgun. In the dark, I fumbled to find the handle, pulling it open to reveal the weapons. I grabbed one of the rifles and loaded it, my mind racing. We waited in silence on the couch, afraid to make a sound, the only noise being the soft, rhythmic fall of snow outside. Then the footsteps returned. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the rifle, opened the front door, and fired 3 rounds into the air. My voice screamed out into the night, but the sound of the shots echoed across the mountains, drowning out the footsteps. For a moment there was nothing, only the deafening silence of the storm. We waited in that quiet, dark house until morning. Greg called us shortly after and advised us to leave, telling us it was better to get out while we could. So we packed up and left first thing, our heads still spinning from the terror of the night. We left the mountain, but I'll never forget the feeling of those footsteps in the snow, of the man lurking out there watching us from the shadows. It was a night that shook me to my core. Every time I hear the crunch of snow beneath my boots, I can't help but remember that feeling, like we were being hunted.